Welcome to Fireside Giants. My name is Alex. My co-host Anthony, the Great Rivardo, here to talk about the Giants receivers again and kind of looking at the free agents for this upcoming season and who they might look at. We'll be doing a draft one later, of course, and really during the offseason we'll be evaluating these draft prospects and players the Giants might be interested in signing or drafting. But for the now, we're going to look at the free agents and kind of get an idea of what there is on the market and who the Giants might look at and say, they can bolster our unit because, as we know, the Giants can't create separation, and it's becoming a serious problem. Against Arizona, every single pass catcher ranked underneath the league average in yards of separation. So that's a really big problem that we're going to have to solve sooner rather than later. Thanks, OBJ, for leaving us with a band of misfit toys who can't create separation. I'm just kidding. Sterling Shepard, I love him. Love Darius Slayton. These guys are actually really talented. Jason Garrett's just not giving them the right route concepts to get open and really beat these man coverage assignments. And we're going to talk about that. Before we dive into it, Anthony, how is your Tuesday going?
Tuesday's going all right. I can't really complain. I've played a lot of Battlefront today. I'm pretty good with Boba Fett now, so, me and my Star Wars. Anyway, yeah, I'm excited to talk about the wide receiver position because that's my favorite position in football, and I love the wide receivers. They're like my bread and butter. I like to break them down. I like to watch film on them, which we're going to do this week. We're going to watch film on Slayton and Shepard and Tate. And I'm excited for that because I love the wide receiver position. So I'm excited to talk about it and talk about some of these better players that we might be able to acquire in the offseason, potentially, depending on how our cap space shakes out, which I think we'll have to discuss a little bit as well in this video, because it might be kind of hard to sign some of these big names. But, Alex, who are some of these big names? Why don't you let me know who you're thinking of?
Absolutely. Well, there's some pretty big names entering the free agent pool for wide receiver. And the Giants, of course, are going to be looking and trying to figure out how do we best allocate our resources to, find out who we can sign or draft and really bolster the unit. So obviously you have Kenny Gallaudet, who's a big guy. He's a 6'4", 214-pound receiver. So he's a guy that can go up, has a big body, red zone threat. You have Curtis Samuel, who's a speed guy. He's smaller, 5'11", 195 pounds. He's a pretty decent option if the Giants are looking to go for like a high-end wide receiver too, who can really stretch the field and create separation. He's from Brooklyn, New York, so he'd be coming home. 24 years old, pretty young. August 11th birthday, so he's a Leo just like me. Allen Robinson, if you're into the zodiac sign stuff, actually Allen Robinson is August 24th, so another Leo. Don't tell me Kenny Galladay. No, he's November 3rd, so we're fine there. Allen Robinson, though, 27 years old, 6'2", 220 pounds. He's your real number one guy. He's the real wide receiver one that you would be targeting. You can make the argument that Galladay is too, and Anthony and I are going to go back and forth because I don't actually think the Giants should look at Galladay, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. But those are the three guys that we're talking about here as potential free agent options for the Giants. But again, it comes down to the cap space because they have defensive players that are going to be hitting the market. Logan Ryan, not Dexter, of course, Leonard Williams, and Dalvin Tomlinson. Those are the three main guys the Giants are going to have to look at and say, do we re-sign any of these guys, all of these guys, some of these guys? I'm imagining they're going to go with Leonard Williams and Dalvin if they really, if I put my chips in on them. But Logan Ryan's going to want big money because he's making the transition to safety, and he's looked pretty good so far. So this is a big question, on defense. Who do you keep? Who do you let go? And how much money do you have to spend? And Anthony, who do you think the Giants cut? Because this is going to be a big question. Nate Solder, Golden Tate, Kevin Zeitler. Who are they clearing, out to up their cap so they can target some of these big wide receivers and keep some of their defensive pieces?
Who are they cutting? I think, Golden Tate is pretty obvious. If you're going to get a wide receiver, you might just cut Golden Tate and then replace him. That makes a lot of sense. I think Nate Solder, why would we still keep him around? We have a left tackle that we think is our future, even though he's coming off of a very bad performance. Andrew Thomas looks pretty good this year. He had a rough stretch. He had a good stretch. So, like any rookie would, we've seen a lot. We've seen some good things. So he's our left tackle now. And then if you want to move Nate Solder over to right tackle, well, Cam Fleming's not going to be here, sure, but we still have Matt Parrott. And I think that we all want to see Matt Parrott start by now. I think we've all been saying that for weeks now, that we want to see Matt Parrott start. So I definitely don't want to see Nate Solder starting over Matt Parrott. I think we're all in agreement on that. So I would like to, cut Nate Solder, move on from that contract. That's a very large contract. Hopefully we can free up some cap space there. And then defensively, there's really not a whole lot of players that you can think of to cut. I think also back to the offense, Kevin Zeitler might potentially, he's a player that could potentially get cut as well. But who on the defense? Who did you mention?
Well, there's a bunch of guys that are going to be getting, cut, not cut really, just based on their 1 year deals. Obviously, they have Kyler Fackrell's 4.6
Oh,
million.
yeah. He'll
So
be
just some
off the
guys they're going to be
books,
adding.
but they just
Right,
wouldn't
he'll be off the
re-sign
books.
him. They wouldn't be cutting him. Yeah, he'll
Exactly.
be off the books. I don't think that he'll come back. I think there's a good chance that Logan Ryan walks in free agency, and I do think that unless we splurge really hard in free agency ourselves, I think that Logan Ryan walking could actually get us a third-round comp pick because I think he's going to get a pretty decent payday. And I think that the Giants would love to have him back. Unfortunately, though, it's probably just not going to work with the cap space, and we do have Xavier McKinney in the fold, so it's pretty likely that that becomes the guy. But I don't know. Who knows? We'll see. It's playing the waiting game for now, but just basically the message, we're pretty tight on cap space right now. The Giants are pretty tight on cap space. One of these guys is probably going to have to walk. One or two of these guys is probably going to have to get cut. And then we'll have to go from there and see what we can afford from this wide receiver free agency class. But I got to say, you mentioned a few of the names. There's even more names than you mentioned. There are a lot of guys out there, a lot of really talented wide receivers that could potentially fill that wide receiver one role for the New York Giants.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see what they do with the cap space because you could look at a guy like Kevin Zeitler who's going to count about 14 million next offseason, and you could say, let's cut him, let's put Shane Lemieux there, Will Hernandez at left guard, or vice versa, and really just save the cap. But in my opinion, letting a guy like Zeitler go is going to hurt that offensive line one way or another. So that's a big debate that we'll have during the offseason. Do they let a guy like him walk or really just cut him and save the cap? Nate Solder will 100% be cut because he's not going to play left tackle with Andrew Thomas there, and right tackle, you want Matt Peart to be the guy. So, these are all questions we're going to face. And the cap's going to go down by about 20 million. Some say 7, some say 20. It could be pretty high. So I wouldn't even be considering this cap next offseason as like the one you want to build your roster around. I would say overlook that, backload the money to the second year if you have to. The Giants aren't too far away from being a good team. I'd say after that Arizona contest, we took a step from good to like okay. I think they're hovering in that area. So, you got to be optimistic and look at the roster and the coaches and say, we can get better and we need more weapons, especially for Daniel Jones. And the first guy I want to talk about is Kenny Galladay because I know Anthony's a big advocate for him. Like I mentioned before, 6'4", they call him Babytron over in Detroit, which is actually pretty funny. 6'4", 214 pounds, from Northern Illinois. He's a big guy. He's still young at 27 years old. The problem with him, he has been injured a lot this season. He has a hip injury and he's missed an extended period of time. This is updated since December 4th and he's still been out. He's only played in, 5 games this year. And in the 5th game, he basically only played, a little bit. He didn't even get a catch. But when he does play, he's a lethal threat, right? He's a downfield guy. He can push the boundary, but he can also run routes pretty well. Out of the 5 games he played, really the 4 games he played, he had 2 of them were over 100 yards. He had 2 touchdowns, and his catch rate was, bounced from 85% to around 66%. So he's pretty fantastic when it comes to just overall productivity. So my question for you, Anthony, is do you think that he's a guy the Giants could look at, and maybe because of this injury, do you think that maybe they could get him for a little bit cheaper than previously anticipated?
So here's the thing with Kenny Gallaudet. I think that he's extremely talented. I like the Babytron nickname because I think it suits his playing style because Megatron, Calvin Johnson, he was ginormous and he could catch the ball literally over anybody, kind of Randy Moss-esque, but he was also, Calvin Johnson is like an otherworldly talent. He was an amazing route runner and he separated with his routes just as much as he caught passes, bodying people in the paint, right? Kenny Galladay's similar. He's a pretty good route runner. Like he's not like an elite route runner, but he's a good route runner. He separates, he gets open, and then of course he has that ginormous catch radius where all of I think, man, I don't remember what game it was, but he had like 6 receptions one game this season. All 6 of them were contested catches, and they were all like highlight reel insane catches. And he didn't get in the end zone, but he put up like 90 to 100 yards or something, and he was just making insane catches left and right. But the thing with Kenny Galladay that tells me the Giants will be interested is that there was a report like a month ago or 2 months ago, whenever the trade deadline was coming around, that the Giants were interested, and they called the Lions looking to trade for Kenny Galladay. And I think that's pretty interesting because they know that Kenny Galladay is about to be a free agent. So were they really going to do the Leonard Williams thing again and, trade for a guy and then try to franchise tag him in the offseason? I think really they saw Kenny Galladay as a guy who, it might come cheap right now because he's been dealing with injuries. And that's something that they can capitalize on. They can say, hey, we're going to trade for you, and then you're going to play for us. You're going to have to prove that you can stay healthy on a franchise tag. Or they're going to trade for him, and then they're going to sign him to a contract that's maybe just a little bit cheaper than an Allen Robinson or something, because Kenny Galladay has not been able to prove that he can stay healthy. But he has proven that he's talented. He is a number one receiver. He is an excellent player. He's just not always healthy. And I do think that could give the Giants the opportunity to get him for just a little bit cheaper than a guy like Allen Robinson. Because Allen Robinson, while he has had injuries in the past, over the past few years, he's remained pretty healthy. He missed pretty much the entire 2017 season. I think he tore his ACL that year. But since then, 2018, 19, and 20, he's played every single year. He's played 12 or more games every year he's started in. And he's already over 1,000 yards this season, and he's only played 13 games. There's 3 games left. So that's a guy who really is a true number one. He led the league in total touchdowns back in 2015. That's actually really impressive. I didn't know that. That's a while ago when he was with Jacksonville. Is he going on his third contract then? Yeah, he's going for his third contract. So he's got to be getting up there in age, right? Allen Robinson. How old is he?
He's 27.
So he's not really getting up there in age. He's got plenty of...
Not at all.
He's totally young. So, yeah, but see, that's the thing, right? Like, this is a guy who has led the league in scrimmage touchdowns, right? This is a guy who has proven for years that he is excellent. Like, he's going to be really expensive. He's probably going to get a contract that's worth over $20 million, and that's if the Bears don't re-sign him. And even if they don't, I think that they would be fools not to at least just put him on the franchise tag and trade him. So I think one way or another, the Giants are going to have a tough time having enough money to actually afford these guys. But, Kenny Galladay is attractive to me because I don't think that the talent drop-off is that steep between the two. But I do think that the money drop-off, whether it's that steep or not, it's drop-off. It's drop-off. And if we could save some money and get close to the same production, then I'm all for that.
Right. With Kenny Galladay, honestly, he might be willing to do a 1-year prove-it deal. After his injury-riddled season this year, I don't know if any team's going to be willing to offer him a long-term extension, 3-4 years. He might be looking, because he's coming off his rookie contract, right? And he was a Pro Bowler in 2019, but he's only played 5 games this year. So we're going to week 15, so that says a lot about what he's done, and can you really trust him? So in my opinion, the Giants might be able to look at him and say, "We'll give you a 1-year prove-it deal. We'll make you our number one receiver, and let you compete. Let you really fight." To get that next contract, that next big deal. So that might be something to consider. Maybe offer him $15 million for 1 year. That could be something reasonable. Allen Robinson's going to want in the 18 to 20 million range. He's going to command that money because he's the best guy in the market. He's going to reset the market this year. Maybe not reset it, but he's going to be up there. With the cap going down, you just simply can't do it. And honestly, if we're talking Allen Robinson or drafting somebody, I'm going to draft somebody because I don't think the Giants can afford to drop that kind of money right now on a wide receiver, especially when they have Saquon Barkley coming back. I say you draft a number one guy. You still have Darius Slayton. You still have Sterling Shepard. You got Evan Ingram and Saquon. That's plenty of wide receivers and playmakers. If Jason Garrett can't figure it out with that type of talent, with Saquon back, and you draft a guy in the first 2 rounds, I don't know what to say. I mean, that's really just an indication that you need a new offensive coordinator. The problem is, I don't really know if Jason Garrett can handle developing these passing concepts. And this is what Anthony's been saying the past couple days, is that, maybe we need a new offensive coordinator if we're going to be going after a new quarterback, or new wide receiver rather. And maybe if we want to keep Garrett, you bring in maybe a third party to help him with the passing concepts, because he's been phenomenal in the run game. He's called really good running plays, but it's the passing game that just lacks creativity, and you see it all over the place. But Anthony, what do you think about that?
Well, I want to give Jason Garrett, I'm very critical of him right now, but I've been pretty positive on him for the past few weeks. I want to give him a little bit of a benefit of a doubt here, right? I want to play devil's advocate and say, if he had a guy like Allen Robinson in this offense or in any offensive scheme run by Jason Garrett, you think back to the Dallas Cowboys and when they had Dez Bryant, right? And then they had a guy that was like Cole Beasley working from the slot. So compare Allen Robinson to Dez Bryant, compare Cole Beasley to Sterling Shepard, and then compare Terrence Williams, who they had on the opposite side of Dez Bryant, to Darius Slayton. That actually could make a lot of sense for Jason Garrett. And that really might open up the whole passing offense for him. Maybe he is actually just lacking the players that he needs to run his scheme. Maybe I'll just give him a little benefit of the doubt. That's all I'm going to do, right? Because I'm pretty critical of him. I think that there's really no excuses for how poor the passing game has been schemed together this year, how poorly it's been schemed together. But benefit of the doubt, let's give him, a little bit of some positivity here. Let's say I think that having a guy like Allen Robinson could really, or like a Kenny Gallaudet, just a number one wide receiver, like a true number one threat, I think that could really open up this offense for Jason Garrett. And I think that some of the problems with his passing concept might be just because he does not trust his wide receivers to actually get open on some more complex routes. It could be that. I think this stuff is very bland. I think it's very vanilla offense. I think we've really thought that for the majority of the year. But I will say he just might not trust them to actually do anything legitimate, and he just might be waiting for the day that the Giants do get a number one wide receiver who can do some real damage from the outside.
Yeah. I mean, that's the problem, though. Can we trust Garrett to actually do it? My biggest, question is the inconsistency of Garrett's scheme because, you have guys like Evan Ingram. They've already picked up his fifth-year option. Why is it that 1 week he has 129 yards, 9 targets, and 6 receptions, and then the next week he has 32 yards, and then last week he had 18 yards? Good teams take their playmakers, like think about Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Darren Waller, and they force feed them no matter who they're playing against, right? You take your best playmakers and you get them the ball. You find ways to scheme them the ball. Everybody knows that Kyler Murray is going to throw it to DeAndre Hopkins, but somehow he still manages to get over 100 yards every game, multiple touchdowns on occasion. This is the type of thing that I'm trying to break down, is that Jason Garrett does not routinely get the ball into his playmakers' hands and scheme them open. They disappear at times. That's my biggest concern.
Right, and that makes sense, but here's my thing is you're mentioning guys like Evan Engram and Darius Slayton and Sterling Shepard. Like, those are the playmakers that you're mentioning. And then you're thinking about players like DeAndre Hopkins and Travis Kelce. Like, there's a huge talent difference. Like, I get you what you're saying, but again, playing devil's advocate for Jason Garrett here, maybe if he had a guy like Allen Robinson to scheme these things for, scheme these plays for, like an actual serious true playmaker, that might be the difference. It might just be maybe these guys that are on the Giants roster, yeah, of course they're talented. They're in the NFL, and they've had productive seasons in the past, but maybe they're just not true threats, true players that you can run an offense through. Maybe that is the problem for Jason Garrett. And you know what, though? I'll also say this, going against Jason Garrett, that should not hinder your offense this badly. You should be able to scheme something better than this together. We have literally scored the second least amount of points in the NFL, only behind the Jets for the least amount of points. Like, that is just pathetic, and that's it's inexcusable. It's inexcusable. Yeah. So
that's the thing, though. When you consider the fact that the Giants are on par with the Jets' offense, you have to take a step back and say, okay, there is a problem here. Who is to blame? The offensive line has been playing fantastic lately, and the only reason they've won games is because of their running game. Aside from the defense, of course, the defense is most of the credit, but their running game is the reason they've won. I mean, Daniel Jones has put together some nice drives, but none of them have screamed out, this passing attack is elite. And here's the thing, I would rather. Okay, so the offense kind of generally runs on this concept. We're going to pick up first downs. We're going to pick up first downs, and that's what we're going to do. Move the chains one step at a time. But here's the problem with the Giants offense. I would rather them pick up chunk yard plays on like deeper throws, stretch the field, than not take shots at all. I was begging the entire game for Jason Garrett to scheme up some plays where they take shots downfield against Arizona, and I've been begging and begging and begging, and then he takes a shot on 3rd and 1 inside his own 15-yard line when you need to get a first down. That's the type of schematics that I'm concerned about. And last week I was saying, Garrett's looking pretty good because the running games look really good. That was my main point for that. But at this point in the season, when you're not calling deep threats, deep plays, stretching the field, and they're playing 4 linebackers in the box, what are you supposed to do? How do you actually justify, keeping him when he's doing things that are not helping the team? With that being said, if you get a number one guy, like let's say they get Kenny Gallaudet or Allen Robinson, or they spend a first-round draft pick on Devonta Smith or Jamar Chase, and then in the first year, Jason Garrett, doesn't manage to get him open, doesn't manage to scheme these guys open, then you're looking at firing this guy mid-season. You're looking at, you got to fire Jason Garrett, who has a connection with the Giants, has a relationship with the Maras. You have to get rid of him because he's holding your team back. And I made this argument in the last YouTube video. The defense and Patrick Graham has looked phenomenal, and they've had rookies and practice squatters and people you've never heard of before, and they're playing way above expectations. And then you look at the offensive side, and they have similar level of talent, and they're dead last in the league, almost right on par with the Jets. So the argument here is, if Patrick Graham can do it, why can't Jason Garrett do it with lackluster talent? You know what I mean? Like, there's two sides. You have to look at both sides. And in favor of Jason Garrett, I will say that the wide receivers have had little separation. Daniel Jones is going through injury. He has rookies plastered across the offensive line. The run game has been way better than expected. Obviously Saquon Barkley's out, and he was supposed to be a focal point in that offense. The only thing I will give Jason Garrett right now is that I think he had big plans for Saquon, and he was going to use him very similar to Ezekiel Elliott to open up the offense. And he hasn't been able to implement his plan fully because he has Wayne Gallman, who's an entirely different style runner. So I think, if you factor in the idea that maybe his scheme is different with Saquon Barkley, you can justify keeping him another year, because he might be telling them, guys, like, my scheme is developed for a guy like Saquon, developed for a guy who can catch the ball out of the backfield. Gallman is not a receiving running back by any means. We saw him catch a pass or two against Arizona, but he is not a guy you're targeting in the passing game. Saquon is a guy you're running up the seam on a 9 route. Against Chicago, we saw it a couple of years ago. This is what they're missing on offense. And if you stretch the field with a guy like that, you have a complementary back to help out Saquon. This offense looks entirely different, in my opinion. So that's my reasoning, for giving Jason Garrett an extra year, because he doesn't have Saquon, and that's the Giants' real playmaker. That's the biggest threat. But if you add a number one wide receiver to that mesh, that combination, maybe that opens things up, like Anthony's saying. So I think Saquon might be the biggest key, the biggest cog and catalyst for Garrett in the future, because he did well with Ezekiel Elliott, and now not so well with Wayne Gallman and Dion Lewis and Alfred Morris, who didn't even have a job at the beginning of the season. So what do you think about that? Do you think Saquon Barkley is the missing key here, and do you think he was developing his scheme around him?
Well, I think he's done a good job running the offense through Wayne Gallman. It's just, when you're running the offense through Wayne Gallman, what else are you afraid of other than Wayne Gallman? Like, you limit your offense, right? There's no playmaker. But I want to say you gave him the benefit of the doubt because he didn't have Saquon. I'm going to give him some credit. The development of the offensive line this season has been extraordinary, really. I think we're all really pleased with where this team was on the offensive line from week 1 to now week 15. Like, huge improvement, huge progress. So you do have to give Jason Garrett some credit for that. And I think that's, me personally, one of the leading reasons that I would want to bring him back if I do. I might not want to bring him back. I want to wait until the end of the season before I make that decision. I want to see if we make the playoffs, because we're still pushing for that, and I want to see how he calls the games in the playoffs if we make it there. But if we are going to move on from him, it's really going to come down to, if we keep him, it's going to come down to the offensive line, I think, and how well that the offensive line started to play in the second half of the season. Because I think he had probably a big part to do with that. Jason Garrett, or Mark Colombo was fired. Judge kind of cleaned that area of the coaching staff, but he kept Jason Garrett, and I'm sure Jason Garrett has a lot to do with the offensive line, scheming an offensive line that, really lacked talent at the beginning of the season, but they were schemed together to play pretty well. So I think that we can be pretty proud of what Jason Garrett's done there. But I think in terms of having that playmaker in Saquon Barkley, I'm not sure how big of a difference that would have made, because I think it's going to circle back around to the problem that the Giants don't have a wide receiver. They don't have the number one wide receiver. And the problem is, if everybody is just keying in on Saquon Barkley, if he's your one and only playmaker in the backfield, everyone just keys in on that, well, then you're not even going to run the ball as well as you are with Wayne Gallman, because they're not all keyed in on Wayne Gallman, right? So they're just all keyed in on Saquon. It makes it really tough for Saquon to actually run the ball. Saquon had a really good rookie season because he was playing with a number one wide receiver. He was playing with Odell Beckham Jr., and Odell was commanding double teams on the outside, while Saquon was getting, less stacked boxes, right? So it worked in tandem together, and really what's going to open up the running game is getting another number one wide receiver on the outside for the Giants. And I think you look at who's available this offseason. We mentioned Allen Robinson, Kenny Galladay. There's other guys too. Will Fuller is somebody that a lot of people think he's definitely going to hit free agency. I don't think that he's going to re-sign with the Texans. He's a guy that I personally am not a big fan of, but there are people who are big fans of Will Fuller because they think that if he could stay healthy, he's like your premier deep threat in the league.
I don't like Will Fuller for the Giants. I don't
either.
The Giants, and the number one reason is Deshaun Watson runs around in the pocket and launches 60-yard passes to him. Daniel Jones is not going to do that.
Will Fuller is also okay. That's a fair point, but Will Fuller is also like extremely fast. He stretches out the entire defense and open things up for the running game. If you have those deep concepts of Will Fuller, they got to respect that. Then you open things up underneath for Saquon. So that's one way of looking at that. You can also say the same thing for Curtis Samuel because he's a deep threat. But to me, both of those guys are really high-end wide receiver twos. You know, they're not number ones. And then Juju Smith-Schuster, he's arguably number one. I think that he's a pretty decent guy to pretty decent name to bring up, but I don't think that he's leaving Pittsburgh. Corey Davis is a guy that I really like, but Corey Davis, the problem is he's never gone over 1,000 yards. He's never really proven that he can be that number one guy. So I think again he's a number two, and then Chris Godwin, he's a number one, but I don't think he's leaving Tampa Bay. And then so that really leaves you with
guy, though.
Yeah, but your number one guy can be a guy in the slot. It can be.
I want him to be. I want him to be inside and out, though. You know, I want him to be able to play inside and outside.
I agree. So that really leaves you with limited options then, you know? It leaves you with Galladay or Robinson, and there's 32 teams in the league, and at least 20 of them are going to want to sign those two guys, so the Giants are going to be fighting for that, and they're going to have a lot of cap space problems in doing that. So, you know, I'm happy we talked about this, but I'm excited to eventually we're going to have the discussion about the draft, because the draft, and we probably won't have it until the offseason because we don't know where we're drafting right now, but the draft, I think, is going to actually end up being the better opportunity for the Giants to find that wide receiver. But again, just to finalize my point, responding to your Saquon point, I don't think this offense would have been much better with Saquon in it. I think it actually maybe even could have been dead last, even though we're second to last. I think it could have been dead last just because of the fact that the whole defense would have keyed in on Saquon Barkley. That is it. They just would have focused on Saquon Barkley, and nobody gets open on this team. So you literally just don't have a running game either, and you don't have a passing game. But once Saquon is in this lineup and we have that number one wide receiver, then I think you open up this offense and it becomes excellent. I truly do believe that. I think Saquon plus a number one receiver is when this offense finally takes that stride. Because, you know, back in 2018 when it was Odell and Saquon, offensive line was terrible. Tight end position was inconsistent. Ingram was hurt all year. And then the offensive line was the main thing. And then this was also when Eli started to decline. So if you have a good quarterback and a good offensive line playing with a really good number one wide receiver and Saquon, then yeah, I think you unlock a whole nother level of Jason Garrett's offensive scheme or whoever the offensive coordinator is, and then I think you find a really good New York Giants offense for the future.
Yeah. I will say I loved your point about Saquon needing a number one wide receiver, and I think most running backs do to really unlock that full potential. Think about the Chiefs, you know, what they have in Tyreek Hill, Mecole Hardman, Sammy Watkins, what it did for their running backs. You know, it really stretched the field. The defenses could not stack the box when you have speed guys like that on the outside. I don't think Fuller's the right answer, but here's something interesting. I'll detail this. Yards per reception for Kenny Galladay, 16.9 yards per reception. So he's getting targeted deep downfield. He's a deeper threat. Curtis Samuel's at 9.6. So he's a better shallow route runner than I would say Kenny Galladay. Allen Robinson is the best route runner of all of them, but I like Curtis Samuel as a short guy crossing routes, you know, drags, hooks, not a deep guy that's going to stretch the field. And then Allen Robinson's at 11.9, so he's a good middleman. He's a good average there. But Curtis Samuel's catching 85% of his passes this year. That's pretty crazy. You know, compared to Robinson, you know, who's at 67.2, and Galladay, who's at 62.5. Curtis Samuel's catching everything that comes his way. He's being targeted 5 to 10 times per game. You know, we don't have a receiver that I can say Daniel Jones is targeting 5 to 10 times per game. You know what I mean? Like, he doesn't look like he wants to throw the ball. He doesn't feel confident throwing the ball to any of these guys. But I do agree, though. I think that, you know, a number one wide receiver would open up the offense so much for Saquon Barkley. My problem with it is that I don't feel comfortable spending big money on a wide receiver. I say you allocate the draft spot to it because the defense, you know, Patrick Graham is going to put together a good defense without top tier talent, and you still have your you know, first, second, third round picks. and money in free agency, I say you allocate, a first or second round pick towards a wide receiver. Then you have your guy, whoever that might be, to fit Jason Garrett's mold. Whoever he wants, if they stick with Jason Garrett, whoever he wants, that he knows is going to really fit the way he wants to utilize his offense and the way he wants to utilize Saquon Barkley. Because Barkley is going to play a huge factor in deciding what receiver they want, right? They want somebody that's going to be open shallow, is going to be really, really great for opening up play action, but also can stretch the field. We're going to talk about Devonta Smith, Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle in a couple of weeks when the time comes. Still too early for that. But I figure, free agency is a topic that we can talk about now because we're watching the limitations in live action limitations of Jason Garrett's scheme because of that limited ability from the wide receivers and the lack of separation. I'm curious, do you think that they would go for a guy that's more of a short yardage Curtis Samuel guy that can, get into space quickly, or, really spend the money on an Allen Robinson? Do you think Kenny Galladay, I'm going to go back to this question, do you think Kenny Galladay would actually accept a 1-year prove-it deal?
I don't think Galladay accepts a 1-year prove-it deal because I think that he's going to have a team offer him a huge contract. And I think, wherever the money is probably where he goes. I think a team is going to, and probably the Detroit Lions will negotiate with him and they'll offer him something long-term because he's a fan favorite, And then, I don't know. I think that really you just need, someone who gets open, someone who separates. And I also want to mention, we mentioned that, we should probably draft a wide receiver to save the money, right? Get one of those guys in the first or second round. The only problem with that is it might take that guy a full year, maybe even a year and a half, 2 years, to actually realize his potential and become a number one wide receiver. Till then, he might just be a number two. And then what's going to happen with the Giants fan base, they're going to get very impatient, and they're going to be like, I thought all we needed was a number one wide receiver. I thought this guy was going to unlock another level of the offense. And it's like, well, yeah, probably once you give him a year to actually settle into the league, because it's a whole different game. But that's the only problem there, right? Wide receivers sometimes do take a little while to fully make it to their level. But sometimes you get a really rare special talent and instantly they come on the scene. We can think Odell Beckham Jr. He's actually one of those players that just came in and was dominant. Mike Evans too, really, even though it really took him a full year before he became that dominant force that he is now. But, so that's that point that I want to make. And then in terms of who I think, what kind of style of receiver the Giants should get, if it's Jason Garrett, then big body outside receiver, Des Bryant-esque, because we saw what Des could do in this offensive scheme. But what kind of receiver I would like? The best route runner possible. That's my opinion. I love a route runner.
Man.
It's just not going to happen, dude. It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen, but listen, man, the guy has his body control, his ability to get in front of cornerbacks and just really dominate at every level it's unparalleled, man. He's the guy that comes into the NFL and blows it up right away,
Probably.
I don't think Devonta Smith, I think he's a long-term going to be a great player in the NFL, but I don't think his first year is going to go as smoothly as people want it to, because he's 175 pounds. He's going to get bullied. He's going to get jammed. He's going to get jammed on the line of scrimmage, and he's going to have to figure out how to get over that. But Jamar Chase is a guy who's going to destroy people right off the get-go. But, that's the discussion that we're going to have all offseason. Do they go free agency route or draft route? So we're going to keep monitoring you guys on this and really what we think as the season progresses and the offseason progresses, because all these guys are coming in healthy for the most part because COVID. That's the one benefit of COVID. All these guys will be healthy. Nobody will have a massive injury that ruins their draft stock. They're coming into the NFL draft process healthy.
Jalen Waddle did tear his ACL, I believe. He tore something.
This year?
Yeah.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Super unfortunate for Jalen Waddle. But Devonta Smith, he should be fine. He's healthy. I think Jamar Chase opted out, right? So,
he opted out,
a lot of these guys, what's his name? I think Rondale Moore out of Purdue. I think he opted out. There's a few guys in the second round or late first round. That's where they're projected to go. They opted out. They were smart. They're not going to get injured. Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle, though, yes, he did tear something, and he's out for the rest of the season. He's going to be fine for next season, the start of next season, and I fully do expect him to still go in the first round. He will go in the first round. It's not going to kill his draft stock like that. He's definitely going to go in the first round. He's that talented, and he's that fast.
Okay.
He stretches your offense. He stretches the defense out, and he changes your offense once he realizes his full potential.
Yeah, I'm excited to do all these draft previews and film breakdowns during the offseason. It's going to be awesome. But for the time being, make sure we're going to do this week a wide receiver breakdown for the Giants from Arizona. Look at what's going on. Is it the routes? Is it the separation? Is it Daniel Jones? Is it Jason Garrett? Who is to blame here? Because right now I'm leading Jason Garrett. But at the same time, DJ's hobbled. I don't think the decision to start him was a good one. I think Joe Judge, that was the first thing I disagree with him on. Anthony believes differently. But that's part of the fun. We can't always agree on things. So as always, guys, we really appreciate the support, checking in, listen to the wide receiver spiel and the free agents that we have on our minds and what they would offer the Giants long term. But as always, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.
TVSO.